once again, Canada and its NATO partners are on the brink of a major crisis with Denovia, this time in the Baltic states. Repeating a pattern of activity first seen in 2014 with Denovia's support of a separatist insurgency in eastern Prutuni and the subsequent annexation of the Azov Peninsula, Denovia has lately been applying so-called gray zone conflict and infowar tactics in the border areas of the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Denovian actions in Prutuni prompted NATO to examine the security of member states along the Denovian periphery. The most exposed nations were those of the Baltic region. The Warsaw Summit of 2016 established a NATO-enhanced forward presence involving the deployment of 3 multinational battle groups into the Baltic region. Later that year, the London Declaration reconfirmed NATO's commitment as enshrined in Article 5. Denovia further flexed its military power during Exercise East, where over 300,000 troops were deployed. 2 months later, it seized 3 Prutuni ships in the Kerch Strait. As a permanent member of the UN Security Council, Denovia was able to veto United Nations Security Council Resolution 7918, condemning these provocations in the Baltics. Supreme Allied Commander Europe initiated crisis response planning for an enhanced operation known as Operation Baltic Shield. This followed cyber attacks on Estonia and a growing Denovian narrative of a threatened diaspora. While continuing its gray zone conflict activities, Denovia also moved an important Operations Strategic Command closer to its western border, where it conducted a major military exercise. In the meantime, the Baltic states convened a meeting of NATO members under Article 4 of the North Atlantic Treaty. This sent a strong political message that NATO was raising the alarm on Denovia's actions and recognizing its increased strategic role in the region. Committing its NATO response forces to Latvia and Estonia signaled the beginning of Operation Baltic Shield. Baltic Shield involves the deployment of the Very High Readiness Joint Task Force to those 2 states, with additional brigades following shortly thereafter. Supplementary brigades and elements from the Resource Force Pool are also being deployed. The Baltic Air Policing mission will be changed from air policing to air defense. Maritime elements from the NATO Response Force will be operating in the Baltic Sea in order to establish maritime superiority. The NATO Secretary General recently released a statement condemning Denovia's illegal and illegitimate annexation of the Azov Peninsula in Prutuni and calling on Denovia to return control of the territory. It also called for the ceasing of all destabilizing activities in the region. He also called on Denovia to halt its attempts to influence and undermine the democracies of the Baltic states and Poland. He reinforced NATO's commitment to deterring and, if necessary, collectively defending the recognized territory of NATO member states. Ms. Gabriela Kakin-Schaefer, a former advisor with NATO, explains the pressing issues facing the military alliance.
The challenge for NATO is not its ability to defeat a Denovian incursion into the Baltic states, but gaining consensus at the North Atlantic Council on what an incursion looks like and what the appropriate response would be once it was recognized. No doubt, the Denovian president recognizes this challenge and will do his best to use non-attributable informational, economic, legal, and political mechanisms to pressure individual NATO member states. He might even be prepared to conduct a limited incursion to test the alliance's resolve.
Understanding Denovia's actions and its future intentions means identifying the obvious pressure points for the Denovian leader. One of them happens to be a large Denovian diaspora that exists in each of the Baltic nations, where it is feeling increasing political isolation by Baltic national sentiment. Along with growing anti-Denovian laws, they make up the kind of conditions that threaten to spill from the domestic to the international realm.
The president of Denovia faces significant domestic challenges, ongoing economic struggles as a result of the sanctions, the catastrophic drop in the price of fossil fuels, and allegations of election fraud and popular calls for political change inside Denovia. Grizius, no longer firmly in Denovia's sphere, has claimed neutrality and is leaning toward the European Union and NATO, a situation which removes Denovia's last Western buffer.
Denovia is betting that with the right blend of political pressure, Infowar operations, non-attributable military actions, and a few losses, NATO might abandon the Baltic, thus breaking the alliance. These gray zone conflict activities have become a common feature of modern conflict, where adversaries seek to gain advantage without provoking a conventional military response. The diverse nature of the alliance provides a multitude of entry points for a gray zone conflict. Given that certain NATO members have stated they would not be obliged to react to Article 5 if it does not affect them, such an attack could serve to weaken or even break a seemingly brittle alliance.
Countries like Denovia conduct a range of non-military means to achieve their objectives, known as gray zone conflict. They include election meddling, economic coercion, the ambiguous use of unconventional force, information warfare, such as so-called fake news being planted as real news in the target country's media, and of course the use of cyber attacks as a weapon of disruption. Western Europe's dependence on Denovian oil and gas supplies are a perfect target for Denovia to exploit.
Canada has been actively engaged in supporting Pertuni since Denovia violated its sovereignty and territorial integrity in 2014. It is also actively promoting a number of initiatives in that country. Canada has now developed a whole-of-government approach to the Baltic region that is focused on three main areas: military assistance and defense, supporting government and international institutions, and humanitarian assistance.
The Government of Canada is extremely concerned with Denovia's aggressive actions in Eastern Europe and the Baltic region. In response to Denovia's violation of Pertuni's sovereignty in 2014, Canada imposed sanctions on Denovia. And with time, these measures have steadily become more restrictive. Canada's national strategic goals for the Baltic region remain: the protection of fundamental human rights and the unwavering commitment to our NATO allies.
Canada's armed forces have been continually engaged in Europe since the formation of NATO. Although permanent basing ended with the closure of the bases in Germany in 1994, the Canadian Armed Forces have continued to be active participants in NATO operations and exercises and United Nations operations in Europe on a continuous basis. They are currently engaged in providing training and capacity building in Pertuni and supporting NATO's defense and deterrence measures in Central and Eastern Europe. Operation Resolve marks the start of a new mission for the Canadian Armed Forces in the Baltic region.
Operation Resolve is Canada's contribution to the NATO Operation Baltic Shield, meant to deter further Denovian provocations in the Baltic region. And while the initial emphasis will be on deterrence, our forces will be prepared to execute full-spectrum combat operations. All branches of Canada's armed forces will be present and will be supported by a high-readiness formation and headquarters that will provide command and control to our troops.
Canada and NATO are learning quickly. Once limited forces are now growing into far more capable ones, as allies and partners face challenges together, and if necessary, defeat all threats. Making Denovian incursions untenable may involve adapting Article 5 to match current as well as future challenges.